All right, Dr. Anderson, can you hear me?
Yes,
Would you like to speak to your uh, poll quiz that's come up for everybody, or you want me to?
I can do this. Hello and welcome, everyone. We'll get started in just another minute or two. Thanks for joining us this week. We'll be talking about unlocking the potential of perennial ground covers. And while the last couple of weeks have focused on management of it as a system, and then thinking about that grass aspect, today we're going to talk more about the ground cover aspect. As we're waiting to get started, just like we have every week, we have a poll question here for you. So if you could answer a couple of poll questions, we just appreciate getting to know more about what you think, what your concerns might be, and we will get started in just a minute or two here. Once again, we appreciate you all for joining us. The material is available online later, so if there's something interesting that you hear and you want to share it with a friend afterwards, we'll make sure that we get you all of that information. With that said, it is my pleasure to introduce you to three speakers that we have on tap for today: RAMAN, SARA, LIRA, and MEMIS. Each one is going to be talking about a different aspect of how breeding corn relates to this system and some of the results that they've seen and how we might think about managing these systems. So in order to stay on time, we'll let Raj get started here in a second. If you have any questions for any of our speakers throughout their presentations, feel free to type them in the chat as we go, and we'll try and answer one or two at least between presentations, and then answer a few more at the end. So with that, Raj, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Dan. And let me ask you a quick question, logistical, which is I'm seeing your poll sort of as a presenter because how I came in. You don't need me to do anything with that, like share results or anything, do you?
You do not. I will handle it.
Got it. Excellent. Well, as Dan said, welcome everybody. Um, I'm Raj Raman. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I think you can see my screen. You know the title of this excellent webinar series that Dan's put together for us. And today is day 4. We're focused on corn hybrid performance and perennial ground cover systems. And I'm going to kick it off by talking a little bit about why this matters. I have a feeling you all know, but I just want to put a cherry on top of it and talk about some of the factors driving the brittle behavior in perennial ground cover systems and why breeding matters, just to set the stage a little bit. So the promise of perennial ground covers that Cindy Bartel talked to us about a couple of weeks ago is that if you look at the perennial ground cover cash flow, you have in this little bar chart I have for you here, number one, first year, you've got a pretty significant negative, and that is the cost of establishment. And then if you look at a case where you've got a stover market and you have a greater stover take possible, and you have equivalent yield, you basically make money in the out years, right? And by the second or third year, depending on stover prices, you're probably paid yourself back. So this kind of promise is absolutely dependent upon achieving yield parity with standard corn. Because if you don't achieve yield parity with standard corn, it eats away at the size of those green bars, right? You can still make it work probably, but every bit of yield loss is gonna hurt, right? Furthermore, it sort of depends on a successful one and done establishment, right? Because if instead of having the one orangish bar going down there, we have that in year 2 because we didn't establish, all of a sudden the math doesn't look that good. Furthermore, the promise of PGC gets better as your ground cover lifespan goes up, right? If I tell you that, oh, this ground cover is going to last maybe 5 years and then you're into the cycle again, you get one kind of math. If I tell you that it's going to go for 10, math looks a lot better. So these are some of the finer points that I think we can start talking about as we get deeper into this webinar series. And I've talked about brittleness. I've used that term. Brittleness is the risk of a significant yield reduction compared to a non-PGC control at the same site. And I'm just showing you one example, sort of exemplar data from almost 17 years ago, where in work that Ken Moore and student Wiggins, I always draw a blank on his first name anyway, did, in that very first year, suppression really didn't go well. And if you look at the control in yellow, and you look at the PGC system in green, the fescue system, and the KBG system in brown, that kind of yield drag, the green is obviously an absolute disaster, but even the brown is not a particularly good day for that farmer at scale. So that brittleness is driven by the presence of the ground cover. And the desirable sorts of ground cover that what we really sort of dream of, or at least I do, Sarah and others here can set me straight, but my dream is that that ground cover, as you get emergence, is pretty much brown. There's a very clearly defined crop growth zone, and it's not very tall. And it just got brown ideally. Here's what we would call a risky early season ground cover situation. You still have a crop growth zone, but it's nice and green. It has not turned color. We've had this occur several times due to challenges in suppression or maybe planting, getting stuck and planting our hybrid bulbosa in the spring instead of the fall, and it's staying green much longer than we expected. It turns out, quick side note, soybean seems to tolerate that, or at least has for us in several cases, but your corn will not tolerate that. So what makes perennial ground cover systems brittle? There's actual competition for resources like water, nutrients. Some people occasionally will ask us about carbon dioxide in general. That shouldn't really be an issue. If you had a ground cover that could successfully compete for carbon dioxide, you would have water and nutrient issues that were way, way greater. My estimation, the way I understand plant physiology in these systems, is that water and nutrients come first, right? But why might even a shallow, short, but green ground cover, in that picture I showed you before, why might that be a risk to corn yield? The way we understand it, it's shade avoidance responses. It's that response that really arguably all plants have, but to differing degrees, and most corn has it pretty significantly, that says that if the plant detects reflection from green plants nearby, it's a change in the red far red spectral ratio, it throws energy into growing tall. It sees that it's in a race, if you will, and it wants to get out front. And the problem is that in so doing, even though that ground cover in the picture that I have there might not really be that much of a competitor, if the corn puts the pedal to the metal to grow tall, doesn't put energy, carbohydrates into growing strong roots, deep roots, you pay significant yield loss later on. So having said that, I want you to know that perennial ground cover comes in many, many varieties. There's unsuppressed systems where the ground covers are essentially left alone, or often in organic systems where chemical suppression isn't an option. You can that could lead to high competition, and it necessitates robust management practices. There are suppressed systems. That's generally what we think will go to scale early and be popular early. These are conceivably mechanically, although I'm not sure how realistic that is at scale, systems that we brown the ground cover with a chemical, we reduce competition with the row crop, but we need precise timing of the timing and the right application of chemical for that to succeed. It is a non-trivial ask of people. And then you've heard us talk about this radix hybrid bulbosa that's a biologically suppressed or maybe self-suppressing plant where we get a ground cover species or variety that tends to go dormant very early season, aligning with the crop's growth cycle. That is very powerful. I want to point out that corn planting date really matters in these systems. The timing significantly affects the dynamics of competition. Early planting gives corn a head start, reducing competitive energy of the ground cover. But hang on for a second. If you have these ground covers that are going dormant on their own and they go dormant several weeks after emergence, if you've early planted, not such a good story. Whereas I know that we've had some trials where people have planted corn late into some of those ground covers, and when the corn has emerged, the ground cover is ready to go, had already browned up, and they got great yields compared to their controls. So, and I've said this repeatedly, these systems, managed competition agriculture systems, are fundamentally a little more complicated than what we currently typically do. We need to appreciate that. There's a critical role for breeding, and that's why we're going to hear from two outstanding breeders on our team today. We believe that judicious management of a ground cover can minimize the actual competition for resources like water and nutrients, or I believe that anyway. PGC breeding efforts can lead to ground covers that are easier to suppress or that self-suppress, and that's one highly effective pathway to lowering the brittleness of these systems. But there are also possibilities to reduce the shade avoidance response in corn, which seem to be such a key driver of the yield losses in these systems, especially when suppression doesn't go as planned. And the truth is, it's not always going to go as planned. So wouldn't we like to have a row crop that's a little less hypersensitive to that presence? We think there might be some possibilities like that. And I'm going to turn it over to the outstanding other presenters we have. I'm going to stop my share. I'm going to look at the questions or the chat. And Dan's just saying, if you have questions, you can ask them, and I'll defer them to one of the smart people who are speaking today.
All right, as we transition, MEMIS, you're up next, so if you can start sharing your presentation. And then Raj, I do have a question for you. As you talked about this project, we really have a three-pronged approach.
Yeah.
Breeding corn to be less sensitive, breeding grass maybe to play nicer with corn, and then using some of those management in terms of tillage and chemical suppression. Yeah. Could you talk of sort of the near-term, long-term vision of how those fit together?
Oh, Dan, I can talk about them, Dan, but the truth is we have an active, ongoing, friendly argument in our project about what are the short pathways to scale. I would have told you, everybody here 3 years ago, that I thought that a Kentucky bluegrass system that was chemically suppressed is the way that we would see the largest acres in the nearest time. I am starting to be less confident that that is the short way, and I'm starting to get more excited about radix hybrid bulbosa, in part because of some of the establishment challenges that we had early on. The other thing that I will say about working with a radix hybrid bulbosa or some other self-senescing type of plant is that I feel like you're not fighting biology as much through the growing season. I think because of that, you're maybe exposing yourself to a little less yield risk. At the same time, truth in advertising here, we know that radix hybrid bulbosa isn't quite as thick of a mat of root and shoot, and I'm kind of curious to see more, learn more about what the ecosystem service profile is of RHB versus KBG. How's that for an answer, Dan? Did I hit on what you had in mind, or is there something else we should talk about?
No, I think you gave a great answer, so I think that was really helpful. All right, with that, if you do have questions at any point, feel free to type them into the chat, but we're going to transition to MEMIS. MEMIS and Thomas have been looking at the question of, can we breed corn plants to go with PGC better? And also the question, should we? So with that, MEMIS, the floor is yours, and looking forward to hearing what you have learned in the last couple of years about breeding for PGC systems.
Okay, thank you for thank you. Then, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello. Oh, perfect.
Loud and clear.
Thank you. My name is MEMIS. I'm a PhD student in Dr. LUBBERSTEDT. Today, I'm going to talk about should we breed corn for PGC. So you have heard all about this wonderful perennial ground cover system. And you know that this system has a major challenge, which is sometimes we don't get good yield from the grain crop, such as corn. You may also know that our team is trying to address the yield loss in multiple ways. Some of my friends in agronomy are working on better separation of perennial ground cover, because we know that when ground cover is brown and emerge, we don't have much of yield track. Some of other breeders on the project are working on novel perennial ground cover that will go brown on their own. This has the same kind of benefit, but there is a different approach to reducing yield track that is trying to see if we can make corn plant itself less sensitive to presence of ground cover, and in particular the presence of green ground cover. How can I? Okay, perfect. So when corn is cultivated in perennial ground cover system, we face challenges related to competition between cash and cover crop for light, nutrition, and water. Understanding how different maize hybrids respond to this condition such as interaction between genotype, environment, and management, is critical for maize for optimizing yield and ensuring long-term sustainability. Our experiment addressed the question whether dedicated breeding of corn hybrids suitable for PGC system is needed. We screened 69 experimental as well as 2 Corteva check hybrids to explore ranking difference for grain yield under conventional versus perennial ground cover system. While the primary trade of interest was grain yield, we also collected data for yield-related physiological and architectural traits such as plant height, ear height, leaf angle, spot, and flowering dates. So we use 2 species. One of them is Kentucky bluegrass, the other is Pobble bosa. As you can see left side, untreated, we just move Kentucky bluegrass. And right side is Pobble bosa radix. So after planting corn, it was the brown. So this is the in 30 days how look like under Kentucky bluegrass corn. So here some of my experiments are based on in the growth chamber where I can very carefully control spectrum of the light to explore how different corn hybrids respond to change in spectra. The reason is important. It is sensing the spectrum of reflecting light that probably driving the yield response that we can see in the field. So I would like to show you here. Red means mimic of the cover crop such as Kentucky bluegrass. White means white light means in the conventional the control. Oops, sorry. This is growth chamber. As you can see, early stage corn growing very faster under PGC rather than conventional. But later stage, after flowering, we collect plant height. Plant height under conventional is taller than PGC. This is the nice graph. So if you focus on the red line, like if you follow under PGC, corn plant is growing very faster than conventional. Later, conventional is taller than PGC. So some of my other experiments are based in field plots where I'm really trying to see how different corn hybrids respond to being grown in perennial ground cover background that is green. Now let me share with you some of my results, those field experiments. There are a couple of interesting things I would like to call you out. First of all, in genotypes that we test, the highest yielding genotypes in normal agriculture setting, all it purely in perennial ground cover. That was no super perform that was highly performing with no ground cover, high performing with the ground cover. On the other hand, there were some hybrids that seems to perform better with ground cover. Now news is actually mixed because the hybrids that perform better in ground cover were hybrids didn't not perform that well, or there are not the very high yielding hybrids, but the fact that some of these hybrids seems to driven up perennial ground cover background give us hope that there might be breeding target that we can work through. So we collected ear height and plant height in conventional and Kentucky bluegrass. Under conventional, plant height, ear height taller than PGC. Leaf angle was so upright and more erected in PGC system. Spot in conventional is higher than PGC. Grain yield also in PGC higher than conventional first year. As you can see, the line crossing indicated genotype by environment interaction, where different hybrid response differently to the two environments. This is the 2020 yield result. The Pobble bosa is the highest, second one the conventional, and third one the Kentucky bluegrass. So Kentucky Pobble bosa it look like the more promising as a cover crop for PGC. Again, the interaction genotype by interaction ranking of hybrids is changing. So this is the all 5 environment in 2023 and 2024. X-axis representing different environment such as conventional, Kentucky bluegrass, and 2023 and 2024. And Y-axis representing yield performance So each line representing genotype with its performance plot across the environment. If we focus on black one, it is very top and good hiding. In conventional, it is not the best one in Kentucky bluegrass in 2023. That means if we select our hybrids under conventional, it is not good PGC. So we should focus on the PGC system. So highest mean yield, Bulbosa Black Star, as you can see here. So, and lowest mean yield, Blue Diamond, as you can see here. Conventional system shows the yield decline from 2023 and 2024. Kentucky bluegrass system also declined significantly from 2023, 14.44 tons per hectare to 2024, 18.12 per hectares. The same genotype performs differently across environment, year, and crop system. So as you can see, conventional in 2023 is highest and 2024 a little bit decline. Kentucky bluegrass again the highest second year decline. Bulbosa is the highest grain yield. Here I would like to show you Kentucky bluegrass traits. So generally leaf angle, more upright leaf angle, it's a good indicator for grain yield, and plant height is positive correlation. Also, if taller plant tend to giving good yielding. So this is the under Kentucky bluegrass corn have look like. So I don't think there is a water problem in Kentucky bluegrass system, because after harvest corn, grain yield under Kentucky bluegrass, corn moisture was higher than Bulbosa and conventional in Iowa. This is good for, I think, for Iowa farmers. Kentucky bluegrass could keep the hold the water and support corn when needed. Here I would like to show you there is a little bit big gap in Kentucky bluegrass system, first year and second year. So why? This is my theory. The differences in shade avoidance response, light competition, root competition, and nitrogen distribution between first and second year of the planting in perennial ground cover system involving maize and grasses. First year, it was the knee field, light competition more than root, but root competition less intense because the grass roots system are still developing. These allow the maize roots to spread more freely and access more light and soil resource, including nitrogen and water. With minimal root competition, most nitrogen is available for corn, particularly supporting ear development, grain yield. So when it comes to second year, increase significantly as grasses establish strong, dense root system as well as the light competition. This competition reduces maize ability to dominate resource uptake. More nitrogen is absorbed by established grass root, focusing on their survival. This result is less nutrition being available for maize, which can negatively affect corn yield development or overall yield performance. So there is a high correlation between Kentucky bluegrass and Bulbosa. That's a good indicator. We should focus or selecting our hybrids under PGC system rather than conventional system. This is the hierarchical cluster analysis in terms of genotyping ranking. So close environment are Kentucky bluegrass in 2024 and Bulbosa 2024. Again, we should focus on the PGC system, PGC environment rather than conventional one. So overall result and recommendation, the ranking of our test cross hybrids for maize grain yield and plant height was different in under conventional and PGC condition. However, our traits are very limited in number of environment and at best very preliminary. To develop maize suitable for PGC system, breeders should focus on selecting genotype hybrids based on performance in PGC environment rather than conventional one, with a focus on grain yield. Our Kentucky bluegrass PGC system reflects the worst case scenario. Trait to suppress the PGC failed and corn compete with green PGC. In this situation, there would be a need to breed specifically for at least Kentucky bluegrass system, such as performance in conventional environments may not reliably predict performance in green PGC. However, summer dormants and during summer grown PGC like bulbosa or treated Kentucky bluegrass appear more promising and more similar to conventional environment. I would like to thank you, Dr. LUBBERSTEDT, Brandon, Sarah, Elans, Yuru, Raj, Ken, Jody, Paul, Ushi, Elnas, Bo, Roger, Jane, Leticia, Diego, Alice, Alison, Gabriella, and Dr. LUBBERSTEDT. Thank you.
Excellent, Memish. Thank you so much. I haven't seen any questions fly across. Please feel free to send us any that you have. And in the meanwhile, Memish, if you will stop sharing, and then Sarah, if you will hop on.
While we're waiting, I'm going to fire off a question. I
Go
thought it was
ahead,
really
Dan.
interesting that in both 2023 and 2024, your highest yields came on plots with ground cover, but your overall average yield was worse with ground cover plots. So do you have any comment on that? And then did those hybrids exhibit something different? Like they didn't get the higher leaf angle that you had been seeing generally from ground cover?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, you mean in 2023 and 2024, why there is a differences? You mean?
Well, in both 2023 and 2024, your actual highest yields occurred on ground
Yes.
cover plots, right?
Yes.
And I was really surprised by that because we were afraid of this brittleness or yield drag. So was there something just different about those hybrids that you noticed?
Yeah, there is different hybrids also. We didn't treat our Kentucky bluegrass, so maybe because of that, there is a huge gap. The other things is nitrogen competition and the shade avoidance. Yeah, we use 54 hybrids in 2 years, but 39 is the common one. So each year we are adding new one. So I think there would be some promising for PGC system hybrids.
Yeah, I think that was really optimistic that we saw a couple great yielding hybrids, at least in both those systems. So with that, I'll get out of the way. And Sarah, excited to have Sarah LIRA here to talk about selecting commercial corn hybrids for use in these systems, specifically well-managed systems. And I'm sure she'll talk through how to make sure we're trying to do that. So take it away, Sarah.
You bet. So maybe I'll just start by introducing myself. I am a breeder at Corteva. So I am lucky enough to partner with a public research group, a big and beautiful public research group on this project. So I'm going to bring a bit of a sort of commercial perspective to the system and to the research we're doing. And I'm speaking on behalf of other people who have done most of this work. So Brent Wilson and Adam Walters here at Corteva, and Roger Hintz, who has really helped us a lot with growing some plots in Ames. Okay, so what I'll talk about today is I'll just start again, rehashing again and again the idea of competition between the corn crop and the perennial ground cover. Then I'll share just really quick a little bit of yield results, and then the take-home message that I will share now and like 50 times before the presentation ends, which is that a good corn hybrid for your farm is a good corn hybrid for well-managed PGC on your farm. So the thing we know is that if you manage your PGC really well, you probably shouldn't alter how you pick your hybrid. So I gave you the answer at the beginning, but you still have to pay attention for the next few slides, everybody. Okay, so what we know is that for a corn plant, when you add more plants per acre, that equals stress for the corn plant. So it has to fight for light, water, and nutrients, and that ends up reducing yield. And in fact, the corn plant does not care what the other plant that is sharing its space with is. That plant can be another corn plant, it could be a weed, or it could be a perennial ground cover. And if it is any of those three guys are there taking up any of the resources that the corn plant needs, it will suffer. And the earlier that it senses that competition, the more it will suffer. And so we all know this. We spend a lot of time and energy and money trying to get weeds out of our fields, and that's the reason. And we also know that when you add more plants per population, per acre, onto your farm of corn, that your other corn plants start to get, a little bit stressed and your yield per plant goes down. And the same is true for a poorly managed perennial ground cover. And so what I am going to present today, which is different than what MEMIS has talked about, and which is different from some of the research that our big project is doing, that Raj described, is talking about if you were to use what is available right now, Kentucky bluegrass, commercially as your perennial ground cover, and you were going to use commercially available corn hybrids, how would you choose, right? And that assumes that you're going to manage your PGC to minimize the competition between your PGC and your corn the best possible. So this is a really important distinction between what MEMIS is sharing and what I'm talking about. So I'm saying you're living in a system where you're controlling the competition as much as possible between your PGC and your corn. And so Brent told us a couple weeks ago about the two ways, the kind of most critical ways to manage competition from PGC in the system as it exists right now and could exist on your farm if you wanted to try it, like right now, okay? So the first one is to build and maintain a crop zone. And you can do this right now with strip tillage. That's the most reliable and what we recommend. The other thing we think eventually we'll be able to figure out is how to do this in no-till and maintain your crop zone with herbicide spray. So what you can see in the picture on the left is a well-managed crop zone where there's a nice space between the corn and the perennial ground cover. And then you can see on the right where we messed it up and we planted right into our perennial ground cover. We planted our corn right into the perennial ground cover and it's green. And so clearly the perennial ground cover and the corn are directly in competition for all of the things that the corn needs to thrive and yield a lot. So we want what's on the left, not what's on the right. And the best way to do that, maintaining a crop zone, is with strip tillage right now. The second thing that you need to do to manage competition, again, sorry if this is repetitive, but it's really important, is that you need to suppress your ground cover during the early growth of your corn. And right now we recommend in Kentucky bluegrass that you do this with herbicide. Although Raj mentioned, we think we can do some of this to V6, you want your perennial ground cover to be brown, and that right now in Kentucky bluegrass happens by spraying glufosinate on the grass. On the right is where grass is competing with the corn. It may not be competing as much as when you plant the corn right into the bluegrass, right, in this picture, but it's still competing through that reflected light and maybe stealing a little bit of water and nutrients kind of laterally in the field. So here I'm showing a little bit of data that shows what happens with good management and with learning experiences. So I don't want to say that the site that we grew and the table that we show in Ames was poorly managed, because that wasn't it. This is part of the research process, right? As you learn how to do the management. And sometimes when you're learning, you don't get very good yields. And so these two tables are going to show you the difference between when you manage the competition and when you don't. So I had a plot in Ames in which we tried no-till and strip-till production, and we at that time hadn't really figured out that, you know, how carefully you needed to manage your no-till. And so we had the grass sort of encroaching in on our corn in the no-till area. And then we also had a year where the weather was not, I don't know, what was it doing? It was cool and it was wet, and it made it so that our first suppression didn't stick as long as we needed it to. The corn was growing slow and the grass was going fast. And eventually the grass got green before the corn was ready to be independent and big from it, right? And so if you look on the left, on the bottom, that table shows the yield of bluegrass in the top row, of the control with no perennial ground cover in the bottom row, in a no-till environment, and then a strip-till environment, and then the average of the two. And so, you know, the Ames farm is a good farm, has the potential obviously here to yield almost 200 bushels. So when you go 100 bushels, you know something went wrong. And so what that shows is the cost of competition from the PGC on the corn. On the right is a different site. This one was in Wamego, Kansas. And in this one, we had a maintained crop zone and we had full suppression. And it's not because they're better or worse in Kansas at all. It is because we got lucky with our weather and with our management in the fall before. So we were able to keep our no-till strips clean, and we were able to get a full and resilient suppression because it got hot in Kansas far earlier than it did in Ames. And what you can see there is that your bluegrass treatment, both in no-till and strip-till, yielded more than your control. This one is, I think, okay, this is probably actually an overstatement of the potential of the PGC in an environment. And I think what happened is that our PGC gave us an advantage in what turned out to be an exceptionally dry year in Kansas. So it stopped raining in June, and it didn't rain again for the entire rest of the year. And our PGC ended up being a mulching layer that helped preserve some moisture. And so the take home from this slide and from these data, which I must really, as a breeder, point out to you, this is 1 year, 2 locations. You have to be very careful how far you extrapolate, but I think it's a pretty good example of how not managing your competition can really penalize you for yield in even in really high yield environments, and that proper management can give you a good advantage even in what isn't really that high of a yielding environment. So the other layer in these experiments that we did was not just the PGC treatments, or the tillage treatments, but also 10 hybrids were tested in these locations. And so what I'm going to show you here is only the data from our Wamego, Kansas site. And the reason is because MEMIS is thinking about, can we do breeding to improve the performance of corn hybrids in environments where the PGC is allowed to compete with the corn. I wanted to show, what do you find when you aren't allowing the PGC to compete with the corn, when you're managing the competition as best you can? And what we found in our Wamego site, where we managed the PGC so that there wasn't competition, was that there were not significant hybrid by PGC treatment differences. And that overall, the kind of hybrids that we would pick for any old dryland Kansas style farm were the hybrids that seemed to win in both of our treatments. So in red, I've outlined 2 hybrids that we know are drought tolerant hybrids. And then in blue, one that has, it's not bad in drought, but it has a little more top end yield potential. And if I were a farmer in Kansas, or if I were a sales rep advising a farmer in Kansas which hybrids to grow, that's the package I would sell them, is some drought hybrids, and then some hybrids with a little more top end yield. And that way you're sort of playing your risk for the year. And that applies both in a PGC system and in a regular system. So in conclusion, for your hybrid selection, what I'm talking about today is that if you manage your PGC to reduce the competition, you should see minimal effects of it, which means that you can choose your hybrid using the same criteria that you would use for a non-PGC field. And so then we come back to the statement that I made at the beginning, which is that a good corn hybrid for your farm is a good corn hybrid for well-managed PGC on your farm. Okay, so that's about it. I can stop sharing and take questions for the group, right, Dan? That's what we're doing next, or Raj?
Absolutely. We have time for some questions. So if you have questions for any of our speakers, Raj, MEMIS, or Sarah, please feel free to put them in the chat now. I think, Sarah, your presentation was great, and it really pointed at today with the hybrids that are out there, we have a tool, good management, to make sure that we're maintaining yields. It's interesting that it works so well in Kansas. And in the cover crop world, there's this idea that maybe cover crops help add robustness to the system. Is that what you think you saw in Kansas in a way? That just
I do. Yes. Yes,
so
Dan.
that's something we'll see more in marginal soils in your mind, where there's potential for that improvement, or marginal crop environments, or is that something that maybe can carry over to a place like Ames, knowing that?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so what I think about is that, and I think we know this about cover crops, is that annual and perennial cover crops, they sort of manage moisture in soils, right? And if you're in a dryland environment, what they can do is conserve moisture, which is what you need. But if you're in a really wet environment like Ames, maybe they, help with drainage and improved soil structure, and they can actually manage so that you can get in when it's too wet in other parts of the field, right? So it's those two contrasting things. one thing, Dan, that I want to be really clear about, okay, is that we may have gotten really lucky in Kansas because we were pretty uncertain about Kentucky bluegrass as a dryland Kansas species because it's pretty dry in the spring, but they had a bunch of rain in the spring. So it's possible that this species is not going to be a good fit when we get more and more years of data because they don't get enough rain to maintain it. But in that particular example, it worked really well at conserving the moisture.
Great. And then we got your favorite type of question. How did you weed in your corn rows? What was your approach? And did you use a residual in the strip?
We did use a residual in the strip. And unfortunately, Twain, I'm like the worst person to ask this question of because I don't know what it was. I'm not good at herbicides, but I do know that we managed our strip the way that a strip tiller would manage their strip, right? And so we would have put a pre-emerge herbicide down.
You're getting all the tough ones, Sarah. So Jacob has a question for you. I assume that internal use indicates that the results cannot be referenced in, for example, in the Potawatomi case. Also, are these hybrids lucky if drier climate trends continue into Western Kansas?
Okay, so number one, Jacob, is that my computer, as a Corteva computer, automatically puts internal use on every PowerPoint I make. So it doesn't necessarily mean anything, and you can absolutely have this data. So we can talk about this offline. And I would say that what I think, and okay, so I'm going to give you a biased view. Corteva is where I work, and I understand our breeding pipeline really well. I think this is most likely true of our competitors as well. But we are breeding every year for drought tolerance, and we know that Kansas keeps getting drier and drier, and we have it top of mind. And so our new hybrids will have just as good or better performance as the ones that I shared. And so, yeah, we're ready for dry conditions in Kansas, I would say.
MEMIS, this question's for you, and I think it's related to your bluegrass plots in 2024, and that you referenced that there was more competition that year. Was there any specific varieties of corn that performed well in such conditions that struggled in 2023? So sort of thinking about that competition factor where you're not managing it, is there something we should look at in 2023 and compare to 2024 and say, these are really hybrids that perform better with high competition, I think?
Yeah, the answer is yes, but as you know, there's a there's a yield loss, but some hybrids, I mean genotypes looking very promising in 2024, but there is a yield loss problem. So the question answer is yes.
And then, Sarah, I'm going to hit you with the question I asked Raj earlier about sort of the timeline of how these fit together, breeding ground covers, breeding corn, and then sort of that management to control the competition level. As you think about the perennial ground cover system, and if we were to implement today, I think your presentation hinted that you're maybe in the management camp is what we have to do with the hybrids that are available today and the technology that's out there. Is that fair?
That's fair. Yes.
And you showed hybrids that can perform well in those situations as long as we figure out how to manage that competition factor well.
That's right.
I think there's a really important philosophical point that is here, which is Sarah is coming from the point that if you manage that crop growth zone properly and the PGC suppression properly, the system essentially doesn't look that different to the plant.
That's
End
right.
of story, right? That's why one of her first points or take homes was use the pick the same hybrid that you would anyway, right? And I don't know that it's a counter, but another thing to say, I don't know how to describe it. There's this other view, which is, well, you know, are we really going to be able to reliably suppress? What about the times that it took 3 tries, blah, blah, blah. And wouldn't it be good essentially if you had a roll cage. If you, you know, Sarah is like, if you drive carefully, she's a motorcyclist. If you're just good, you know, and you pay attention, you don't need a helmet, you don't need anything. Just be careful, just do this right, right? And I think that this idea of trying to get hybrids that that aren't so susceptible is kind of like having a roll cage or a helmet or whatever, where it's not so sensitive to it. And they are two philosophies that get you onto the landscape at different rates and with farmers who have different risk tolerance profiles, I think. Somebody argue with me. I'm just sort of thinking out loud after hearing these two excellent talks.
I think that was a great summary of how I heard it as well. Noting that today I'm going to try the SARA LIRA approach of make sure I manage really well, because that's the hybrids that are out there that we can help select well. Okay, last chance for questions, but as we do that, Melissa, if you could share the slides related to getting CCA credits, please. All right, so next week will be week number 5 and our last week of our Perennial Groundcover webinar series. And we're going to be talking about quantifying and valorizing those ecosystem service benefits for perennial groundcover systems. We'll have Marshall McDaniel talking about some of the moisture and nutrient competition. Tui is going to talk about some of the erosion control we have seen. Philip will be talking about some of our nitrogen loss data, and Cindy's going to be talking about how this fits together in some policy discussions. Also, if anyone attending the webinar has interest in field trialing any of these systems, please do let us know, and we'll see what we can do to help you out with small portions of the field or small strips in making that happen. All right, next slide. If you are so willing, please do fill out our voluntary demographic survey. If you've already done this at a different webinar, no need to do it again. But if you're willing to fill it out, you can either go to that link or scan the beautiful QR code, and it will take you to a short demographic survey that the USDA encourages us to have people participate in. So we'll give you just a couple seconds to look at that. Next slide. If you are seeking CCA credits, continuing education credits, if you watch this webinar live, in order to earn those credits, please send your information to Melissa McEnany at mmcenany@iastate.edu. By the end of the business day today, include your name, the name you watched the webinar with, if it's different than your actual name, and your CCA number. And can you go back one slide? I'm going to quick type the link in the chat for everyone. Can you go back a slide for me, Melissa?
I'm trying and it's not cooperating. There we go.
There you go.
There we
I
go.
want to add a slide, but there we go. So. There we go. All right. And then if you do enjoy some webinars, the Iowa Learning Farms does a lunch and learn series every week on Wednesdays. And this Wednesday, Justin will be talking about the Tallgrass Prairie Center at the University of Northern Iowa, specifically on expanding the value of ag conservation programs from butterfly recovery in Iowa. And they do a bunch of interesting webinars every week. So a great opportunity to learn more. So again, if you have any questions, this is your last chance. Otherwise, we'll sign off just a few minutes early today. But I do want to thank all 3 of our speakers for exciting presentations, giving great data on how these systems are performing, how to manage them to get high yield, and the potential to establish a breeding program around corn hybrids. If you need any of the material from today, we will try and get them up yet this week with a copy of the video and field notes of 1-page documents essentially explaining what people had to say. And you can find all of the previous week's versions of that on our website, regenpgc.org, under the Resources and Webinars tab. So with that, thanks everyone for joining us. It was great to see you again this week.